We like to imagine ancient humans sitting alone in caves. Cold, hungry, covered in animal skins, waiting for something to happen.
Okay, relax. Why are you saying cold like the cave owed you money?
Which is cute, but probably wrong.
Yeah, probably wrong. Also, that pause was insane. You took a whole lunch break between cute and wrong.
Because the deeper we look into the ancient world, the less isolated it seems. Long before cities, long before roads, long before money, maps, or written language, ancient humans were already connected.
Exactly. Not on Wi Fi, not on Facebook, not posting new cave, who this, but connected, still.
Not through phones, not through the internet, obviously, but through stone, shells, stories, bloodlines, shared tools, old pathways, and trust.
And there it is. Trust, the original password. Except instead of typing it in, you wore a shell necklace and hoped nobody hit you with a rock.
For a long time, people imagined prehistoric humans as small, scattered tribes. Tiny groups wandering across empty landscapes. Each one separate, each one afraid of the next, each one surviving alone. Just a few people in caves, looking confused near a fire.
Which is basically how movies show them. One guy grunting, one guy pointing at the moon, someone discovers fire for the 100th time. Very advanced cinema.
But archaeology keeps ruining that idea. Quietly, annoyingly, with evidence.
Yeah, archaeology does that. You make one simple theory, then somebody digs up a shell 300 miles from the ocean, and suddenly everyone has to rewrite the textbook. Very rude.
Because archaeologists have found objects in places they were never supposed to be. Obsidian from volcanic regions found far away from the source. Seashells discovered deep inland, nowhere near the coast. Stone tools made from materials that came from distant landscapes. And ornaments that seemed to carry more meaning than simple decoration.
Basically, ancient humans were moving stuff around. A lot. A shell does not just wake up one morning and say, I think I'll go inland. Someone carried it, someone traded it, someone valued it enough to move it.
At first, it looked strange. Why would a shell from the ocean end up hundreds of miles away? Why would a stone from one region appear in the hands of people who lived nowhere near it? Why would different groups, separated by mountains, rivers, and dangerous land, make similar tools, use similar symbols, wear similar objects?
Because they were not sitting alone in caves doing nothing. That's the point. They were meeting people, trading, copying ideas, making alliances, probably judging each other's tools. Because humans have always been humans.
The answer is probably simple. They were not as alone as we thought. They knew each other, or at least, they knew someone who knew someone.
Ancient networking, just with more animal skins and fewer LinkedIn posts. Although, honestly, a carved bone pendant might still be less annoying than LinkedIn.
And that matters. Because when we talk about ancient humans, we usually talk about survival in a physical way. Fire, weapons, shelter, hunting, food, the usual necessities.
The prehistoric starter pack: spear, fire, rock, suspicious-looking meat, emotional damage from winter.
But survival was never only about muscle. It was also about relationships. A group could have the sharpest tools in the valley, but if the animals moved away, if the river dried up, if the weather turned cold, if sickness spread through camp, those tools might not be enough.
Exactly. You can have the best spear in the region, but if there's no food, no water, and no one willing to help you, congratulations, you are now holding a very sharp problem.
But if that group had allies, if they knew people beyond the hills, if they had marriage ties with another camp, if they had traded before, if they had given gifts, if they had built trust, then suddenly they had options. And options are survival.
That's the real thing, not just who has the biggest weapon, but who has people, who knows another valley, who has cousins across the river, who can show up somewhere else and not immediately get treated like a threat. That matters.
A group in one valley might trade with another group across the mountains. One clan might exchange stone blades for animal hides. Another might trade shells for food. Another might pass along information about where the herds were moving, or where the water still flowed, or which path was safe, or which group to avoid.
And that last one is important, because not every stranger was friendly. This was not a neighborhood barbecue. No police, no courts, no "please contact our customer support team." Just you, your group, and someone across the river holding a sharp rock with bad intentions. All right, let's continue the story. So ancient humans needed ways to recognize each other, ways to say, we are not enemies, we have met before, we share something, we belong to people you know. In other words, please do not stab me, we have mutual friends. Honestly, still a useful sentence. And this is where symbols become interesting. A necklace was not just a necklace. A carved bone was not just a carved bone. A painted mark on the body was not just decoration. These things may have worked like social badges, quiet signals, ancient identification. A way of saying, I am part of this group. I come from that valley. My people trade with your people. You probably should not attack me immediately. See, that's useful. Today we have IDs, uniforms, logos, profile pictures. Back then, shell necklace, body paint, a tooth on a string, maybe a really specific haircut. Human beings have always been walking around saying, here is my identity, please understand the social meaning. In a world without written language, symbols had to speak. Shell beads, pigments, feathers, animal teeth, carved pendants, body paint, tool styles. All of these could carry meaning. They could show identity, status, kinship, alliance, memory, and maybe even trust. And trust is not small. Trust is the difference between trading food and becoming the food. Not to be dramatic, that's his job. Because if you wore the right symbol, someone from another group might recognize it. Not because they knew you personally, but because they knew what it meant. And that tiny moment of recognition could change everything. Imagine that. Two groups meet near a river. Everybody is tense. Nobody knows if this is about to become a trade deal or a crime scene. Then someone notices a shell necklace, or a carved symbol, or a tool style they recognize. And suddenly, this stranger is not completely strange. They belong to a network. They are connected to someone known, someone trusted, someone remembered. And just like that, the world gets a little less dangerous. Which is basically the ancient version of, oh, you know my cousin? Then everybody calms down. A little. Maybe. Depending on the cousin. That is the part we forget. Ancient trade was probably not just shopping. It was not simply one person saying, I have 3 shells. Who wants to make a deal? It was social. It was political. It was emotional. It was survival dressed up as exchange. You were not just trading objects. You were trading obligations, favors, future help, peace, access, information, and possibly marriage partners. Which sounds weird until you remember, small groups had a problem. If you stay too isolated for too long, your gene pool gets limited. That was a very polite way to say, things get biologically awkward, very awkward. So distant relationships mattered. Marriage exchanges between groups could keep populations healthier. They could create alliances. They could reduce conflict. They could turn strangers into relatives. And once someone in the next valley becomes family, that valley is no longer just a place. It becomes part of your safety net. That's the part people miss. The network was not just goods. It was people, relatives, partners, in-laws, allies. That one uncle from over the mountains who always knows where the animals went. Annoying, yes. Useful, also yes. You could lose a hunting ground, but still have cousins elsewhere. You could suffer a drought, but still know another group near water. You could run out of good stone, but trade with someone who had access to better material. You could face a brutal winter, but survive because another group remembered an old route south. That is not primitive. That is strategy. Quiet strategy. The kind of strategy that does not look flashy. No giant walls, no kings, no armies, just relationships. Tiny decisions, old favors, people remembering who helped them last season. Very boring, very powerful. And climate made this even more important. The ancient world was unstable. Animals moved, forests changed, grasslands expanded, ice advanced, ice retreated, rivers shifted, food sources appeared and disappeared. And the people living through it did not have weather apps, or maps, or emergency alerts. No little notification saying, severe ice age warning in your area. Nothing. Just clouds looking suspicious, and an elder saying, yeah, this happened once when I was young. Which somehow was the whole emergency system. And in a harsh world, that may have been the difference between survival and disappearance. Not because one group was weak, not because they were stupid, but because they were too alone. When archaeologists find obsidian far from its source, that is not just a rock in the wrong place. It means someone moved it, someone carried it, someone traded it, someone valued it. Same thing with seashells found inland. Shells do not walk, usually. So if one appears far from the ocean, that means contact, movement, exchange, connection. A shell bead is small, but the world behind it is not. It suggests paths, meetings, trust, maybe friendship. Or at least, will I trade with you and not attack you? Sure. Civilization begins. Nobody becomes a master toolmaker by staring at a rock. You learn. You watch. You mess it up. You try again. You get judged by an older person. Because education has always been rude. When similar tools appear across distant regions, that is culture moving. A better blade, a safer route, a warning about danger. That is information, and information is survival. But ancient networks were not only Homo sapiens. That is where things get messy. People want history to be clean. One species wins, the others vanish. Nice little chart, very satisfying. Also, usually wrong. Because our DNA is sitting there like, actually, Homo sapiens met Neanderthals. They met Denisovans. And some meetings did not just leave tools behind. They left descendants. They left pieces of themselves inside us. Very normal, also extremely strange. Maybe this is why Homo sapiens endured. Not because we were perfect. We were not. Not because we were always smarter. Relax. But because we connected. A small group can be brilliant. They can hunt. They can make tools. They can know their land. But isolation has limits. If disaster hits, there may be nowhere to go, no one to call on, no fresh ideas, no backup plan. And then collapse is quiet. No battle, no dramatic ending, just fewer children, fewer fires, fewer voices, until one day, the camp is empty. That is silent collapse. Not always an empire burning. Sometimes collapse is just a path no one walks anymore. A trade relationship that breaks. A marriage alliance that ends. A group becoming too alone for too long. One campfire is nice, warm, cozy, very aesthetic. But one campfire can go out. A network of campfires? That means backup, memory, people. And there was probably gossip. Let's not pretend. Who has food? Who is dangerous? Who has good stone? Who can be trusted? That is not just drama. That is information. No internet needed. Just aunties. Ancient aunties probably had the strongest information network on Earth. When strangers become common, symbols become useful. Who are you? Where do you belong? Are you safe? Can I trust you? Ancient humans answered with shells, stone, pigment, and style. Maybe the first social network was not digital. Maybe it was worn around the neck, carried in a pouch, remembered in a story, passed through a marriage, hidden inside a trade route. That was the ancient network. Slow, fragile, human, but powerful. Because in a world near collapse, the most dangerous thing was not always hunger, or cold, or predators. Sometimes the most dangerous thing was being alone. Connection meant another route, another herd, another winter survived, another story your group did not know yet. That is civilization before civilization. Not buildings, not laws, not kings. Relationships. Before civilization, there was connection. Before kingdoms, there were alliances. Before money, there were gifts. Before maps, there were remembered paths. Before the internet, there were shells, stones, symbols, stories, bloodlines, and trust. And maybe that was the difference between a group that disappeared and a group that became us. No warning, no headline, no empire falling, just one less fire in the dark, then another and another, until nobody was left to remember who they were.